We'll ask everyone to take their seats and get comfortable. And I think the family's going to come in and, okay, they're on. Hello, Michael. I know, the lights are on, but the microphones are not on. I just finished telling Stephanie that everything was going perfectly. Not to worry. Hello. Okay. I think you can talk a little longer. We'll get it fixed. Aha, there we go. There we go, thank you. All right, well, we're not going to start without the family. They're just coming in. Actually, I look around, everybody here is family. Oh my goodness, the stories in this room, the relationships in this room, they go back for so many good years. And it's going to take a while because there's a lot of hugging going on here. We're good. Yeah, we're good, thanks. Even before we begin, I want to thank you, Peter. Where did Peter go? Peter Martin, thank you. Really, you've been a lifelong friend of Roger's since the age of 9, I'm told. And your playing Roger's favorite music is just what we needed today to enter into this space. The magic of music is the space between the notes, the timing. Roger loved jazz, and Roger also had that same magical timing. As you can imagine, preparing for this service was like preparing for a postgraduate masterclass in lessons of law and living and leaving a lasting and meaningful legacy. Lots to read, to study, to reflect on. Roger wrote and had chapters in 14 books. He authored at least 21 articles, including an entry into the Encyclopedia of Public Policy. There are so many texts to study, including the many memos from the early days of CRC, and I promise you I kept every one. And then there were the articles written about Roger in one of my favorites called The Goldman Standard, Reflections of an Interim Dean. Roger credits his parents for planting in him his love of learning, teaching, writing, and serving. And in the wonderful article by Paul Wagman and Bill Freivogel, we learn the details about one law professor's long crusade to stop wandering cops. There are so many causes to learn from that Roger became the go-to person for. Roger was the go-to guy for so many of us on so many subjects. There's also much to reflect on, including the way he made us laugh, from the jokes that delighted his grandchildren, even when he told them again and again, like, "What color is a blueberry?" An orange? And even when the jokes weren't so funny, they made Stephanie laugh because the timing was just so funny. Roger was known to laugh out loud at his own jokes again and again. He had a quick and quiet wit that filled each space with the perfect punchline. Roger left hundreds of roasts and toasts that he graced us with over the years. And yes, Roger's roasts and toasts could have been another lucrative profession. So today we celebrate the lessons and legacy of Roger's life. And we also feel the deep and profound sadness of losing someone like Roger, knowing that we are here today to bring comfort to his champion, his beloved, perfect partner, to you, Stephanie, and to Josh and Sarah and Sam and Lily and Jacob and Tom and Barb and his dear, dear family and friends. Today is a day of mourning for this family, for this community, and truly for all who were touched by this Renaissance man. But Roger could have chosen to die on the saddest day of the Jewish year. You see, last Thursday, as the professionals readied the family for Roger's last breath, the Jewish community observed Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish year. We conveniently say that every terrible, tragic thing that happened to us happened on that day. Why? Because it's much wiser than spreading it out. You know, we'd always be mourning and in grief. But as Sam and Josh agreed, to die on Tisha B'Av would have been too dramatic for their dad. Instead, Roger passed on Shabbat, the day we do not mourn. It's said that those who die on Shabbat have no unfinished business, no baggage, and their souls go right to heaven. They are the tzaddikim, the righteous ones, upon whose merit the world continues to exist. Those who die on Shabbat are giving their loved ones a sign that they are at peace, a sign that we pray will soften your grief. And the day Roger died was not just any Shabbat. It was the Shabbat when we read the words of consolation from the prophet Isaiah. All other days, Isaiah and the prophets are admonishing us for not doing more to fight for justice, yelling at us for our empty religious rituals that do not feed the hungry or lift up the fallen. But on the Shabbat, when Roger so peacefully passed from this world to the next, the prophets gave us a break. They offer us comfort. Nachamu, nachamu, they say, be comforted, people. Another sign, I think, from Roger. So today we are here to celebrate Roger's life, his loves, and his career. Not to focus on the cruel illness that took him from us, but the family does want to make sure that we thank the wonderful staff at the Mother of Good Counsel home, the doctors and nurses of Evelyn's house, and you. Where is she? Dear Kristen. Kristen? Where is Kristen? Where's she? There you are. Hi, Kristen. We love you. Through the awful disease that took Roger, you saw the beauty and goodness of his good soul. When Roger and his family needed an angel, you were there. as were all the friends who cooked Roger's favorite foods each and every day, not to disparage the sisters' cooking. But every day, another friend delivered a meal that was so full of love. And those who are speaking today, thank you for working so hard to speak and tell us the story of Roger's life on behalf of the family. It is said that there is no before or after in the Torah. Time folds in on itself. In the 8th century before the Common Era, the prophet Micah answered the question, why are we here? What is the purpose of life? What is required of us? And he responded so long ago with words that I believe were meant to describe the life of Roger Goldman. He answered, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. So many of you have written to the family, and your words are so appreciated. We hope you will keep them coming. I've read many of the tributes, and they all have a common theme. Roger was a mensch, a kind of man who was humble, a man who served throughout all of his life. His old friend Rebecca wrote, to say I admire him sounds lame in the face of his accomplishments. He was a great man, and he was a great kid. Growing up, one of his remarkable traits was to be in the center of things while also being able to observe us all from the edge. In the angst of teen years, he was kind to all of our classmates, from the rowdiest to the most socially challenged. He remained his own person, so Roger, while most of us tried on different personas, and we never felt judged by him, a remarkable talent. So in these next moments, you will hear from dear friends of this family who accompanied Roger on his journey, putting together the many parts of a life that changed us and changed the world. As he taught and lived justice, as he loved always on the side of mercy and compassion. And to know Roger was to know that he who accomplished so much continued to walk with the kind of humility that made space for so much more. At times like these, we turn to the Psalms to remind us that we're not the first, and as I look around, I know many of you know this path of grief. We are not the first, nor will we be the last to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But I think for Roger, we just have to turn to Psalm 1. Psalm 1 says, Ashrei ha'ish. Ashrei is usually translated as happy, which is good for Roger, but it also means forward-thinking, visionary. Ashrei ha'ish. Roger was a feminist before any of us were. Happy is the man, forward-thinking, visionary is the man who takes a righteous path and does not walk with the lawless or the simple or the scornful. Rather, the law is his delight, and this he studies day and night. And so now he shall be like a tree planted beside streams of living water that brings forth its fruit in season. His leaf will never really wither, for whatever he has done will continue to flourish. He has held the lawless accountable, and they will wither in the face of the congregation of the righteous. And his memory will be a blessing, because we will remember the lessons and the stories of Roger's life, as we first hear from Bill Tucker.
Well, it's obviously completely impossible to follow that. My name is Bill Tucker. I'm grateful to have been invited to say a few words about Roger. I'm going to try to describe a small part of what he has meant to me as having been such a great friend. I just wanted to say briefly, so you know what the program is today. You heard Susan introduce Peter Martin, who's been playing music that's dear to Roger's heart and he enjoyed so much. Following me is going to be Rich Barron, who's going to talk about Roger's early career and how he met Stephanie. Ed Harris, who's going to talk about how Roger was instrumental in founding the CRC, the Central Reform Congregation here. And then Paul Wegman and Bill Freifogel, whom Susan mentioned, are going to talk about Roger's passion for police reform. Stephanie's asked that each of us talk no more than 5 minutes, so don't worry, this is going to be a brief program. Our early years, that's Roger's and mine, were pretty much taken up with fun and games. For Roger, that meant tennis, fishing, and playing the piano, mostly jazz. I can still see him at summer camp sporting that white, round, 40s style sailor cap. Tennis? Well, it seemed he was on the court every day. At camp, fishing meant pulling in a few bass and, as you'll see from the program, some northern and muskellunge as well, that wonderful picture. But at college, it meant a sporting competition in Nova Scotia among a few invited teams. As I recall, Roger caught the most pounds of fish of any of the competitors, so our team from our college finished high up among all those who were participating in the event. Back at college, he decided who our roommates would be, and he took me to Storyville, a club in Boston, to introduce me to jazz. It's all a matter of what you can do with your right hand, is how he described what it took to play well, and he could. All these interactions provided a foundation for keeping in touch later on, when we went our separate ways. When we met up, he was forever trying to figure out what my profession, psychiatry, was all about. Did the practice match the science? Was there any science for the practice to match at all? Behind his curiosity was always a bit of friendly competition. Meanwhile, his career as a professor of law was taking off, and he was enjoying it more and more. When he described the pleasure of coaxing answers from his students, it was as if Socrates was back in action. Over the years, whenever I was back in town, he was ready to pick up where we had left off. I think most of you will recognize how he conducted himself with all of his friends, and so what I'm going to say is really just a reminder to you. Before I get to the substance, a couple of things about his style, namely his patience and what you've already heard and will hear again, his sense of humor. By patience, I mean he would always let me begin the conversation, then ramble on a bit until I began gradually to run out of steam. Only then would he let on what he was thinking of it all. By sense of humor, I mean he always kept his response light, no matter how heavy or serious the issue seemed to me. You all know how funny he could be, inevitably coming up with a way to reframe whatever may have been getting you down. Only half in jest, he designated some of us as the crew who flew slew. That is, those who grew up before our own diasporas across the country. I felt he missed all of us and wanted somehow to bring us back together. But here's the substance. Whether he was looking me in the eye or glancing down so as to be able to look inside himself and figure out what he was hearing, he remained focused, attentive to every word and idea, taking it all in, and then would reframe it in his inevitable way. I always came away with more than I had brought to the table. I tried to think of a poem that would describe how he perhaps felt about all of us here today. The words of Carl Sandburg, another Midwesterner, came to mind. Here are the opening and closing stanzas of Sandburg's poem called The People, Yes. And it's about never giving up. The people will live on. The learning and blundering people will live on. They will be tricked and sold and again sold and go back to the nourishing earth for root holds. In the darkness, with a great bundle of grief, the people march. In the night, and overhead, a shovel of stars for keeps, the people march. Where to? What next? As I have, this is in closing, so many times over the years that Roger has been my friend, I continue to think of him again and again. And whenever I picture his face, he is smiling.
Well, it's lovely to be here, very frankly, to see so many friends and people who, over the last 50 plus years, who have interacted with Roger in so many different ways. And as I greeted many who came in this morning, just to think about where they had been with Roger, how they had seen Roger. We started out in the late 60s. At Legal Services. I arrived a year before Roger did, and it didn't take long to understand this character that had arrived at Legal Services. He was obviously committed and remained so forever. Bill will talk about his journey. But Roger was someone who had no patience, really, to see the kind of granular problems that came into our office at Legal Services every day. We were looking at families who had all kinds of problems with consumer fraud issues, which Roger took on himself, with housing issues, lead paint poisoning. And one picks up the paper today and we're reading the stories about the same things we were talking about 55 years ago. Not a hell of a lot has changed. And it's ebbs and flows, but Roger's sense of humor and his quietness was something that one had to learn very quickly because it was never quite obvious. The one thing that I learned about Roger from the beginning was he was never quite finished. And you had to listen carefully because the humor came at the end when he had taken something that was absolutely outrageous and had turned it into something that allowed us to continue. And I reflected on all this time that's passed, and we have talked over and over again about a variety of different things. I was reminded of a moment in time when Roger and I were going to play tennis on a Saturday. He said, "Why don't you come by?" He said, I got a couple of things I want to talk to you about. I said, "Sure." So I went to his apartment. I can't even remember where the hell it was in the city at this point. And I walked in, and Roger said, "I got a hell of a problem here. What's the problem?" He says, "Well, I'm having a hard time sleeping." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "Well, I have this clock, and I've had this clock forever, and it flips when every minute and every hour," and he says, "and it keeps me up." And I said, "Well, Roger, what the hell's the problem? Get a new clock." He said, "Well, they're expensive." So that was the first part of that conversation. The second was, "I think I know who I'm going to marry." I said, "Oh, really? Well, that's great. Terrific. Anything more you want to say?" "No." He said, "Let's go play tennis." So that ended that conversation. That was about as deep as we went. And so over the years, as we pursued our careers, and Roger, of course, went to the law school, and I was out doing what we do, we obviously had an enormous love for each other. I see Ben here and Bill here. My God, for decades we played tennis every Saturday at 2 o'clock in a doubles game. Josh joined later on. And Roger took enormous glee when he made a good shot. He was absolutely tenacious. And when one looks at what happens today when the pros make a good shot with all the histrionics and the arms flailing and they're all great, Roger would just look at me and smile. And he knew it was a great shot, and one of us had gone sprawling or whatever the hell he had done. But over the years, we talked, obviously, about the situation in the country, in the state, his absolute tenacity with respect to the issue around police and police reform, and all of the time that we worked together here in this great sanctuary. And Roger and I started off on this odyssey with others here in the room. And Roger would say to me privately, with everybody who had a problem, and it was, a little bit like the Knesset, and everybody had an opinion, what it should be, how it should look, and Roger and I would walk away after a committee meeting, and he'd say, "Bear, got to get this done." I said, "Yeah, absolutely, we'll get it done." And he said, "Good." He said, "I'll go figure out how the hell you start a conversation. You go figure out how to get the thing built." I said, "Fine." And so we would periodically share how we had done, and he had gone off to meet with rabbis and trying to figure out how the liturgy be done, and Susan became part of that with Stephanie and others here. And I think the thing that pleased me more than anything is that Roger loved telling jokes and making other people laugh. What I got the most pleasure out of it is when I told him a story and he would laugh from the bottom of his feet. He just would cry. It was so funny. And I was recalling one episode when we were at Legal Services together, and I was in an office that we had on Delmar. And it was a one-person office, and we rotated. It was my week to be there, and there was a secretary in the office. And a client came in, and he had a problem. He had a problem with his mortgage. And he and I spoke about it, and it got to be around noon, and the secretary left to go to lunch. And I figured, well, I'd go to lunch too. So I left and locked up the office and went off to lunch somewhere down Delmar. And I came back about 30 minutes later, and as I walked up the steps to the office, the guy that I had just seen was coming down the steps with our electric typewriter. And needless to say, he saw me. He said, I can't repeat it here. I said, turn around and take the typewriter back and get the hell out of here. We're done. Anyway, I got on the phone, I called Roger. I said, Roger, you won't believe this one. So I told him the story, and Roger was so hysterical about what had happened and the whole craziness of what we were doing at Legal Services that he reminded me about it over and over again as time passed, because it was just symptomatic of the kind of dysfunction that we saw every day in what we did. I love Roger very much. He was really a brother. And over the years, we went through all kinds of things together. And he was a very, very proud guy. He was an extraordinary intellect. He loved what he was doing. He loved his students. And we're just blessed to have had him as long as we did. And I will never, never forget Roge. And I think about him often, even when I'm not with him. And it was really something to have been a friend and a real partner with Roger for over 50 years. One doesn't often get friends like that. And so for that, I'm very grateful. And he'll be missed.
See if I can take this off without losing my hearing aids. My name is David Lander. I'm honored to speak about our friend Roger as we celebrate his life while we grieve his loss. I'm going to talk a little about his time at St. Louis U, a little bit about his social justice work. Roger was on the faculty of St. Louis U Law for nearly 50 years. His recruitment occurred when he was working at Legal Aid with his friend Richard Barron and others. I think Susan was there too. And Sandy Saracen, a faculty member at the law school and president of the Legal Aid Board, knew that Roger's fellowship was coming to an end. At lunch one day, Sandy suggested to Roger that he contact Dean Dick Childress about joining the St. Louis U faculty, and the rest was history. I had just started working at Legal Aid, was counting on having Roger next to me for the rest of the time. But in Roger's words, from a talk he gave when he became a chaired professor, thanks for Stephanie for giving me this talk, what attracted me to the school in the 1970s and what kept me there is that the school lives by its values. Even before I got there, I was aware that Dick Childress, the dean, had marched in Selma. Sandy Saracen helped convince the local bar association to stand by the beleaguered Legal Aid when it was under dangerous attack. And Pete Salsick's working on behalf of low-income housing as the author of the Missouri Housing Development Commission and then its first chairman. Roger believed in engaged scholarship, and he lived it. As his father had suggested when Roger joined the St. Louis U faculty, Roger kept one foot in the school and the other in the world. Examples of his social justice work in the world were presidency of the American Civil Liberties Union during years when he worked hard to make it everything it could be. Roger cared so deeply for those who were left out of the American dream, and he devoted enormous ability and time to help them. The quality of Roger's teaching of constitutional law and other courses and his commitment to his students and to teaching was extraordinary. If you co-taught a course with Roger, you were amazed by his preparation and how gifted he was in the classroom, the respect he had for the students, and the quality of his classroom insights. In fact, Washington University Law School realized this and reached out to Roger, and he taught constitutional law there a couple of semesters. Roger had, as you've heard already, Roger had the uncanny ability to make things fun that weren't so much fun. So it was with writing law school exams. This was the time for Roger to be creative, and it's a perfect example of turning something really hard and terrible into something really good. He invented wild cases with twists and turns. Students had to find the legal issues in these stories. Inevitably, his exams were full of jokes and puns, as was his general conversation. What he enjoyed was hearing the students laugh out loud while they were taking the exam. And then telling Stephanie about how they cracked up while taking a law school exam. 3 years after Roger joined the faculty, Jim Birnbaum, a student, brought to Roger's attention that there was grant funding available for schools that would teach the recently passed federal equal employment opportunity legislation. Jim and Roger worked together on the grant, and the school received it, and for years had a clinical program of a special kind. A generation of plaintiffs' employment discrimination lawyers were taught in that clinic, and it helped launch the careers and their careers and made sure that people who were discriminated against in education had a super lawyer. And many of those lawyers, some of them are in the room today, and they continue to take the hardest cases and do the best jobs. Another student asked Roger to launch a Jewish law center, and at first Roger was kind of taken aback, and he said, you know what, I'll do it. And so for some years there was a Jewish law center at St. Louis U, and he taught some of the courses. Here's one example, one of many examples of Roger's commitment to the school. When Roger heard that an excellent St. Louis lawyer, who was also a constitutional scholar and a Rhodes Scholar, was interested in leaving private practice to teach, Roger went into the active mode. He found the dean, then Dean John Antanasio, and made John cancel whatever plans he had for that night so he could take that lawyer, Joel Goldstein, to dinner. The result was a wonderful career for Joel at St. Louis U Law School and remarkable teaching for students and writing by Joel. It's one of the many examples when Roger saw an opportunity to teach better, no matter what it took, he did it. Roger wrote many scholarly articles, 2 prize-winning biographies of Supreme Court justices. He teamed up with his friend Steve Puro to do important empirical work on 10 important articles. In the midst of all this, Roger also served as a very effective mediator in labor management field and also with local nonprofits. His behind-the-scenes work, which really isn't known by very many people, to merge important nonprofits that needed to be merged, was a huge benefit to the community, and the work fit his personality beautifully. In one of those labor management issues, Roger mediated a salary dispute between the U City School Board and the teachers union. Roger's character traits of focus, passion, hard work with wit. You know, they were talking about Roger maybe taking a different job. When Roger won a contest at the local NPR station for a special witty thing, he won the national contest. And in Roger's way, what he said is, there probably weren't many other contestants. In closing, I'd like to describe one of Roger's many specific gifts to me and to others, his BEFA lunch programs. Roger thought it was important that we become acquainted with people who moved to St. Louis and might not know very many people, especially those in social justice and teaching world, and even more especially women and people of color. He initiated a series of regular lunches to make sure, and he always promoted diversity in everything he done. He insisted on a topic, often brought in excellent speakers. It was called the BEFA Group because after the No Name restaurant where we first met. After Roger became ill, a few of the members of the BEFA Group, at the insistence of Jesse Goldner, who's here, brought their lunch to Roger's house and Stephanie's house. And Stephanie served soup and dessert for us. We were supposed to bring our own lunch, but she was not satisfied to make sure that we had hospitality. So they welcomed us with that. And we had the same kinds of discussions that we had had for years. And as Roger was failing, he sat with us and he contributed. And the sweetest part of all was that sometimes he contributed as he was hurting with his normal wit. And it just was heartwarming. I feel like those were extra gifts that we had. Roger had a remarkable generosity of spirit. All of us who knew Roger were recipients of that gift, and we benefited greatly from it. We all joined the students and faculty over the years at St. Louis U Law School in our gratitude for Roger's gifts, the gifts that he gave each of us, and the gift that his important work gave to people who never knew Roger. We're so thankful to Stephanie and to his caregivers that his last months were less painful than they might have been. Thank you. Thanks.
Before we hear from Ed, we'll hear once again from Peter Martin. Stephanie wrote, "Listening to Bill Evans with Roger, I now understand. Roger loved and played jazz piano. The music is mellow, relaxed, beautiful, easygoing, unhurried, responsive." Stephanie wrote, "Roger was all of those things: mellow, relaxed, beautiful, easygoing, unhurried, responsive." Roger was a tenor with perfect pitch. He could play the piano beautifully by ear. Our earliest music here at CRC was Gail Israelievich on the harp and Roger Goldman on the accordion. And now, please listen to Roger's music from Peter Martin.
In the last song from the musical Hamilton, we hear the words, "Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story?" My name is Ed Harris, and I was asked by Stephanie, Josh, and Sam to tell a part of Roger's story today, the story of Roger and this place, CRC. When you look around, everything that you see here in this space, all of the people, the family, the friends, and more importantly, the things you don't see, the history, the programs, all of the rabbis, the advocacy work, the lives touched, the 39 years of changing the Jewish landscape in St. Louis and beyond. Roger Goldman had a hand in all of this. The Torah portion for the Shabbat, when Debbie and I last saw Roger just 10 days ago, contains the verse in which Moses says to us, "V'hadavar asher yikshe mikem," the thing that is difficult for you, "takrivun elai," bring it to me, ushmativ, and I will hear it. This was my experience of Roger Goldman, especially in the early days of CRC, and probably the experience of many of you as well. What was difficult for us, and there was plenty as we began CRC. We brought it to Roger, and he heard it, and he heard it without judgment, criticism, or anger. A true facilitator and leader. As we began talking about forming a congregation in 1983 and 1984, we met in each other's homes and at the Salad Bowl restaurant in the Central West End. Where is the Salad Bowl today? Nobody knows. You've heard the joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We were 20 energetic and compassionate people coming from all walks of Jewish life, and if the math holds, that's 30 opinions. Roger was masterful at running these meetings, making sure everyone had room to speak and that we all felt heard and understood. That's how we could form this sacred community. Ushmativ. We brought what was difficult, and Roger heard it. And the spirit of inclusivity made central to us by Rabbi Susan was actually started by Roger Goldman. Roger guided us to discuss what our goals were, what our services might be like, how much Hebrew to include, who would advise us, who would be our guest rabbis, what programs we were interested in exploring. Would we have a school? What would our dues look like? Where would we meet, and how to handle even the most basic administrative duties? And he made space for all of us to share our own experiences, our Jewish joys, and our difficult stories. The things we wanted and didn't want. Ushmativ, and he heard them. And he quietly shared his vision of CRC with us. Community, social action, and family. A place to raise our children together. And that vision is what CRC came to be. The news spread quickly about what we were doing. This is from the West End Word. Is the West End Word still around? No. The West End Word. September 24th, 1984, not even 3 weeks from when we declared ourselves a congregation on September 8th. It was entitled, "New Jewish Congregation in the City. A new Jewish congregation has been started by young," and that was in quotes, "residents of the Central West End, University City, and Clayton who find the established congregations in West St. Louis County too large and too far away. Most members are between 30 and 45 years old." Then the article quotes Roger Goldman, our first president, who said, "We will not hire a rabbi now, the congregation needs about 80 households to provide the money needed to pay him. Toward the end of 1984, Roger decided it was time for him to step aside as president. The story goes that he asked me, "Ed, would you rather be president of CRC or jump off a building?" I supposedly said, "How high is the building?" Now, I don't remember this conversation. Roger swears that it happened and would remind me of this every year for 39 years. This is vintage Roger Goldman. He credits me and many of you with the line that he wrote, an example of the kind of leader that Roger was, often in the background, and placing the other, the individual, the small group, the committee, the organization, above himself. Well, I didn't jump off the building, and as president of CRC, I ran practically everything by Roger, including how to structure Rabbi Talvia's first contract, which remains unsigned and framed in her office to this day. Roger was a guide and a source of wisdom for me, and probably many of you. And he was constantly in my ear. Stephanie was constantly in Roger's ear. And all that Roger did for CRC, we know, Stephanie, would not have happened without you. So as we speak about our gratitude for Roger, know that we have this for you as well. And while Roger made us laugh, no one laughed harder at his jokes than Stephanie, Roger's best audience and best friend. And as we got older, our attention began to turn to issues about our health and, of course, the end of our lives. Debbie and I were visiting Roger and Stephanie, and after some time on this topic, Debbie said, "Susan is so busy. I hope she has time to do our funerals." Roger said with a big smile on his face, "You just got to get on her calendar." So we say goodbye to you, Roger, our friend. We will continue to tell your story as we work to be more fair as you were, more even-tempered as you were, and when someone comes to us with something difficult, may each one of us be more able to respond with ushmativ, and I will hear it. Amen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Wagman. I'm an old friend of Roger's and Stephanie's, and of their sons as well. And I'm kind of working on Lily now, too. As Stephanie thought about how we should mourn and celebrate our friend, she recognized that this service would not be complete without a tribute to Roger's work in police reform, work that led to his becoming the foremost authority in the country on the licensing and delicensing of police officers. So Steph asked me and Bill Freivogel to tell you about it. I'm going to provide a kind of introduction, and then Bill will discuss it in greater detail. I'll start at the beginning. On March 21st, 1980, Roger opened his Post-Dispatch and found on an inside page a news article that reported on a killing the day before. A part-time policeman from the St. Louis County municipality of Bridgeton Terrace, near the airport, had seen a man he said he thought was trying to steal his personal car from a parking lot. The part-time policeman said the man had appeared to be reaching for a gun when he used his own police revolver to shoot and kill him. It turned out the man did not have a gun. So far, perhaps an unfortunate but unremarkable story. The kind is not uncommon, unfortunately. But the story went on. The shooter, it turned out, had been fired 3 years before as a policeman in Maplewood after being accused of all kinds of misdeeds, including sadism toward prisoners. One of his own colleagues, one of his own fellow policemen, had accused him of sticking the muzzle of his gun into the mouth of a prisoner and ordering him to suck on it. And so a question flashed in Roger's mind. How could a man who had been fired in Maplewood for these kinds of deeds, many of which had been reported on the front page of the Post-Dispatch, so they were very, very widely known, how could a man like that get a job in a nearby police department only a few years later? Why wouldn't he have lost his license to be a cop? A doctor would have lost his license for doing something so gross, for such gross misconduct in his field. A cosmetologist would lose his or her license for gross misdeeds of that nature. So why hadn't this man? So Roger checked Missouri law, and he discovered there was a gaping hole. Once someone had a police officer's license, there actually was no law that allowed for that license to be revoked. In fact, Roger learned there were actually incentives for police departments to hire fired cops. You could hire them more cheaply. They were damaged goods. So Roger realized he was really onto something, and he began to dig and dig. It took him 7 years, during which, by the way, Roger also helped found CRC and serve as its first president, which may explain why it took 7 years. You wonder how he did it that quickly, actually. But in 1987, Roger and a colleague produced a seminal law review article. It showed that it was very hard for police departments to rid themselves of bad cops. Prosecutors would almost never bring charges, and when they did, juries tended to sympathize with the cops. Internal reviews were always toothless. The only real way to stop bad cops, the article said, to prevent them from getting jobs at other departments, was to develop a system to take away their licenses when they committed gross misconduct. It was a terrific paper, extremely well-researched and tremendously comprehensive. But as it turned out, it was just Roger's opening shot. Here I want to quote Michael Wolff, the former Chief Justice of the Missouri Supreme Court and former Dean of the St. Louis University Law School. Michael would have been one of the eulogists today, but for the fact that he is traveling. But hopefully he's able to watch this service online right now. Here is what Michael said about what Roger did after he wrote his law review article. Most authors of a brilliant law review article stand back and wait for the world to respond, but it rarely does. Roger perceived that you not only have to have the intellectual construct, you have to sell it. He bridged the gap between ideas and policy. And in that regard, and in his persistence, he deserves to be described with a word that usually annoys me, but which fits in this case: unique. Persistence only begins to describe what Roger did. He spent the next 35 years or so selling his idea. He learned that an ex-student of his was in the Illinois legislature and got him to sponsor a bill, which passed. He used a vacation in Hawaii to meet with a key legislator there and get legislation moving in Hawaii. He introduced himself and the issue to reporters across the country who wrote about police-related problems. He testified to legislative committees. He was everywhere. And here's why, and I think it was Dave Lander who alluded to it. The issue allowed Roger to satisfy two of his deepest drives. He'd always wanted to be a scholar, which as a law professor and writer of award-winning books, he was. But he also always wanted to have an impact on the world. He'd wanted to make a difference, and this issue enabled him to do both. Before I turn the floor over to Bill, I want to make one other point. Roger could have done everything I've described and not achieved the results he did. The world is full of people who break their head against the wall for 30 years or more and accomplish nothing except to hurt their heads. Roger succeeded because besides being brilliant and right, he was Roger. He was patient, calm, friendly, and unthreatening, willing to let others, as Ed was just saying, have the spotlight. Never belligerent, rock solid in his principles, but open-minded and balanced in his judgment. Roger's secret sauce was his own character. And all his accomplishments notwithstanding, that's the real reason we're going to miss him.
As I look around at this group of people, I realize that a lot of you are people I know are my friends because Margie and I were Roger and Steph's friends. What a remarkable community this is of people who have given their lives to doing good, as Roger did. In the late 1970s, about the time that Paul and I were writing about the Maplewood Police Department and forcing suspects to play Russian roulette in order to encourage them to confess. There was a new set of neighbors that moved into Parkview, just down about 10 houses east of us on Washington Avenue. It was the Goldmans, and soon we and the Goldmans became the best of friends. Our children played every day. There often were tears when they had to go home to dinner. 20 years after that period of time, Josh and our oldest son, Ben, after they had left college, spent a year living together in University City. The bonds were still so strong. Back in the 70s, both families would go to Flynn Park, where the kids would play on the playground. Steph and Margie and Roger and I would play tennis. In the meantime, around this time, Roger invited me to the game Richard was talking about, where he and Richard Barron and Ben Centuria and I played on Saturdays. I think it was at 1 o'clock, but for decades. Josh has now just joined that group last year, and Roger would bring this mild, good-humored self to these games. He never argued any line calls. He never scowled at his opponents. He didn't even seem to care if he won. Now, I didn't really understand any of this. This didn't make sense to me. Roger did see in Paul and my reporting about Maplewood, he saw what we didn't see, the systemic problem of police officers who did bad things, keeping their badges and doing bad things again. Roger's crusade for police decertification was always top of mind, whether we just played tennis or we were meeting his legal buddies at Beffa's, or the 2 decades that we organized law and journalism lectures at St. Louis University in honor of our friend Jim Millstone, with whom Roger had always played poker on Jim's birthdays. Roger orchestrated the passage of the important police decertification law in Missouri in the late 1980s. He coordinated with Joyce Armstrong of the ACLU. He brought Clarence Harmon, who at that point was, I guess, the inspector of the St. Louis Police Department, to the legislature to testify about how the officers they fired from the St. Louis Police Department would end up doing the Muni Shuffle and showing up in a county department where they would continue to do the things they shouldn't be doing. He lined up Sheila Lumpy to push a bill through the legislature, which was signed by none other than Governor John Ashcroft. Roger often spoke about how more than 1,000 Missouri officers have lost their licenses as a result of the law, which is a much higher percentage than almost any other state in the country. After Ferguson, Roger pointed out to the Associated Press that a large percentage of the police misconduct was sexual assault. The AP found out Roger was right. Roger told President Obama's Commission on 21st Century Policing that the nation needed a trustworthy database of listing misbehaving officers so that the bad officers couldn't just wander to another jurisdiction and abuse citizens again. Roger warned the reporters at the Minneapolis Star and Tribune before George Floyd's death that Minnesota's decertification law was dangerously weak, a point sadly driven home when it turned out that Derek Chauvin had a long list of prior offenses but had kept his badge. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, Roger pushed again for decertification laws in some of the big blue states that didn't have them. They didn't have them because the police unions were so strong in those states. He was active in passage in California, New York, and Massachusetts. With his characteristic modesty, Roger shrank from taking credit, even where credit was due. He said in one interview with Paul, quote, "It's these outrageous cases that bring this to the fore. Look, I wasn't responsible for Michael Brown or George Floyd's death, but it makes it obvious what is needed. I can't pat myself on the back for what just seems self-evident." 7 years ago, around the time of Ferguson, I interviewed Roger, and I asked him at the end of that interview flippantly what he was going to do with the next 3 decades of his life. He laughed and he said, "I still have 6 more states. I've just talked to someone in Massachusetts. I have contacts in New York. I have the feeling that I'll be working on this forever." And he was. Last night I listened to that interview again, listened to Roger's words, and at the time I was actually working on a Sunshine Act request to get Missouri to identify the police agencies that the 1,200 decertified officers worked for. That's still not public record. So Roger was right. We're still working on his crusade. This Sunshine Act request is part of a nationwide consortium of journalism organizations spotlighting wandering cops around the nation. So we're all still working on this crusade. None of us have forgotten who started it. Roger, your crusade is alive. Thanks.
Thank you for this journey through Roger's life. Thank you to each of you who gave us so much to carry with us. And thank you, Stephanie, for knowing just who we would need to hear from today. We will take these memories and these teachings into our hearts and minds so that they may guide us to seek justice as Roger did, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. As Roger's legacy and memory grows in blessing from generation to generation. You know, just before someone dies in our tradition, we chant words from Deuteronomy. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, it begins, listen. Roger's magic, as you heard as the theme here, was that he knew how to listen, and his response, always pitch perfect. He even made it into the New York Times quotation of the day. As you heard, he was so proud of that. I'll mention it again. If the state can take away the license of a barber for misconduct, surely it should be able to do so for a police officer. And you know, Richard, I heard you say so many beautiful things and so many memories. And you're right. So many of the things that you and Roger and so many in this room fought for so long ago still exist. But you know, one of the last things I found myself saying to Roger before he went to Evelyn's house, when I knew he could still hear me, was I'd been spending a lot of time with Thurgood Marshall. It was kind of a way of getting close to Roger, it felt, just have that book. He gave it to me on my 40th birthday. Oh my God, such a long time ago. But I've been reading it, and I said to Roger, you know, been spending time with Thurgood, your friend, and I feel like you gave us the foundation, you gave us the ideas, you gave us the infrastructure, so that no matter how bad the Supreme Court looks today, we know the way it's supposed to look. We know the people that are supposed to be there. So please, don't bemoan anything that any of you have done that Roger did. You gave us, he gave us, and will continue to give us that vision, that high bar for everything in our lives. And we won't stop because the stakes are high. He leaves grandchildren that we have to think about. Over the next few days, we will share more stories and laughter and tears as the lessons of Roger's life continue to unfold at the Shiva today and tomorrow at Roger and Stephanie's home from 4 to 7. We'll have a brief service at 5 to share more stories, more lessons, more of his legacy. And please, tell Lily and Jacob. Lily and Jacob have so many good memories, fun memories of their papa. Picking them up every Tuesday, using the clicker to get into the secret entrance, and hairy dogs. Every grandpa should leave a legacy of something like hairy dogs. Hairy dogs were these hot dogs that Roger would make for the kids that had noodles on the top. I mean, we had to mention that too, right? Because most of you know that Stephanie and Roger were kind of health food people, but not with their grandchildren. Grandparents can let you eat anything. As Lily and Jacob grow, we will make sure that they have a chance to learn from the library of Roger's writings and reflections, the many causes that he championed, and the wealth of wisdom and wit that their grandfather leaves and did for them. Let me leave you with words from his partner, from his sweetener heart. Stephanie, I'm sure you don't remember your life. I'm sure Roger didn't remember his life before you. You grew up together, and you were truly his champion, and from everyone, I've learned over these years that nobody knew him better than you. So I want to end with your words. Most of all, Roger was self-aware. He knew what made him happy, and he did it. He wasn't in a hurry. He had nothing to prove. He took one day at a time. He was humble. He made everyone else feel comfortable because he was comfortable. Roger was thoughtful and kind, selfless and humble, hardworking, determined, organized. Nobody could be more organized than you. You're a good team. You also wrote, I love this. I was in awe of him every single day. And every day I would ask him, how can you be so calm? How can you be so balanced? How can you just go with the flow? Emphasis mine. And every single time he would say, I'll try to get better. Thank you. I love you so much. I love Roger. I love your family, and I know I am speaking for everyone in this room. You have raised the bar for all of us, and we will keep working for that vision of a better world. You've planted so many good seeds. You've done so much good work. We can't stop now. I know we're tired and we're hard of hearing and we're forgetting, but we're not done yet. And no, I'm not retired yet. His name, Roger, means honorable man in Anglo-Saxon, and Louis, refuge of the people in Old German. How did I not give Roger a Hebrew name after all these years? But it wasn't on the ketubas, it wasn't on the bar mitzvah certificates, it wasn't in the books. I don't know. Tom, did he have a Hebrew name? No. The biggest Christmas tree in Clayton, though. And he went out to found this and the Jewish Law Center, and oh my God, he taught us what it meant to be a mensch of a man. So I'm going to give him a Hebrew name today. I'm going to give him Raphael Lev. Raphael is healer. Though he didn't become a doctor like his father, he was a healer of souls in so many ways. And Lev means heart. And your Roger, your father, your papa, your brother, your friend, your Roger does have such a very good heart. So we will end with the El Malei Rachamim prayer and the Kaddish, two prayers that pray for his soul to go from this world to the next in perfect peace. Then the family will leave for the interment, and we'll wait and hear some more music. But first, I'm going to invite the congregation to please rise as we invite Alan Freed to offer the words of the El Malei Rachamim, a prayer that prays for his soul to be at peace.
I can't chant this prayer without noting that among Roger's dozens of other accomplishments, when I had the very first rehearsal of the very first CRC choir around 1985 or so, who should be sitting in my tenor section but Roger Goldman. El Malei Rachamim Shochen Bamromim Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Takat Kanfei Ashkina Im Kedoshim Uteharim Kizohar Harakia Mazechirim Et Nishmat Raphael Lev Ben Alfred Ben Miriam Shechalach Le'olamo Baal Harachamim Yastirehu Beseter Knafav Leolamim Veyitzror Bitzror HaChaim Et Nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach בשלום על משכבו ונאמר
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, please grant perfect rest now in your sheltering presence to our dear Roger. He has entered eternity. God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence and under the shadow of your wings. Be like a river running through him now as his soul is bound up in the bonds of everlasting life. Be his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say together, Amen. Josh and Sam, no one could ask for better sons than the two of you. The love and the care that you showed your father, the respect, the dignity that you made sure that he would have. All through his life, but especially at the end, will never be forgotten. You made him laugh. You made him smile. You made him so proud. And now you are his Kaddish. As you know, the words of the Kaddish don't mention death. They make a bridge between this world and the next. They bring the worlds so close that they kiss so that we can feel the legacy of his life every time you say it. You carve out time each day for this first 11 months or a year to say these words for your father so that you can start to live in his light, continue to live in his love, and carry on his legacy. So I'll ask you to lead us because he didn't learn, but he made sure you would know how to say these words. And so today you can. We'll invite everyone to join us in these eternal words. They're in your program. Words that dare us in the face of death to understand that resistance, true resistance, is in the face of those things we cannot control, in the face of the disappointments and the betrayals of this imperfect life. To live more fully and to dare to love more fiercely, knowing that our hearts could break. So we say with you, Josh and Sam, Yitkadar v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalmad zivrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon u'vyom echon u'v'chayei rechol beit Yisrael, Bagala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach leolam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitomam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shmei dekudasha b'rechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei Shlomo Rabbah min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Usei shalom b'ramah, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yal kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. May the source of peace, compassion, mercy be a comfort to you and to all who are bereaved among us as we say together. Amen. We'll invite the pallbearers to come forward. Again, we'll allow the family to leave first as Peter plays a little bit more of the music that Roger loved so much. Go your way now, Roger, for God has called you. Go your way, may God be with you. May your righteousness, your passion for justice, your sense of humor and your love and your passion for your family and your friends and life, may the glory of God receive you into the arms of Miriam, your mother, and Alfred, your father, your brother Alan, and all who have gone before. I hope they are there waiting. And, little moment of privilege. One of the things Roger was proud of was when we needed blood for Adina, Roger and I were giving blood at the same time, and I wrote down the number on his pouch of blood at the American Red Cross. And that blood went into Adina. And I remember the day, I remember the time. And he loved that he was part of what saved her life, as he did for many. He gave us so many gifts, and he will not be forgotten. Zichrono livracha, his memory and the legacy of his life will always be for a blessing. Amen.